Hi, welcome to the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. I'm Jerusha Graham, the museum manager, and um, thank you for joining us for a conversation with Dr. Myrsini Mamoli and Dr. Daniel Phelps regarding the exhibition Transformed Environments, Paper Informing Design. This show is on view at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking in Atlanta, Georgia through July 10, 2026. The Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking is located on Georgia Tech's campus. Our mission is to collect, preserve, increase, and disseminate knowledge about papermaking, past, present, and future. We have permanent exhibitions as well as a changing gallery. And the show that we'll be talking about is featured in the changing gallery. And we also do educational programming throughout the year. Tonight, we will be hearing from Dr. Myrsini Mamoli and Dr. Daniel Phelps. The Transformed Environments exhibition is a collaboration with the architecture course Museum History, Theory, and Design, taught by Dr. Myrsini Mamoli, as well as the Literature, Media, and Communications course Graphic and Visual Design, taught by Dr. Daniel Phelps. Each of the professors will share their design approach to this collaboration, as well as constraints and considerations that the students had to address when designing an exhibition space. Dr. Myrsini Mamoli is an architectural historian, archaeologist, and museologist at Georgia Tech. Her research and teaching are at the intersection of architectural history and computation, employing traditional methodologies as well as algorithmic methods, including generative grammars and generative AI for the analysis and reconstruction of historical architectural remains. Her recent work to develop a machine learning powered digital network of ancient buildings has been supported by Microsoft and the NEH. Dr. Myrsini Mamoli regularly teaches at the Georgia Tech Study Abroad program in Greece and Italy and engages in fieldwork, um, working with students to digitally document and reconstruct architectural remains in archaeological sites in Greece, Italy, and Turkey. Her ongoing work on the history and architectural form of Hellenistic and Roman libraries is widely recognized, and she is working on the publication of the architecture of the Panteinos Library in the Classical Agora in Athens. Dr. Daniel Phelps develops experimental narrative systems that integrate and expand the boundaries of media and design practice. His work synthesizes advanced computational methods ranging from robotics and real-time simulation to physical computing and generative AI with aesthetic frameworks such as anamorphosis and multimodal design. This integration operates not simply as a technical enterprise, but as a critical exploration of how technological processes mediate perception, embodiment, and interactivity. Within these immersive media architectures, Phelps cultivates conditions of connection, wonder, and curiosity, inviting audiences into encounters that are both intellectually and effectively generative. Now, the first person you'll be hearing from is Dr. Myrsini Mamoli. I ask that you put any questions in the Q&A to make it easier for us to find those. And we'll take questions after both speakers have presented. Thank you. Dr. Myrsini?
In Roman. Hello, so I'm Myrsini Mamoli, and I have been working for a long time on ancient libraries. This has been my motivation into working with the Museum of Papermaking, where books that are known from literary sources, accordion books or books written on leaves, books made out of bark, are mentioned in literary sources but don't survive from the ancient world. So through this experience, my collaboration with the museum, I've been able to gain a whole new insight. So the class was Museums, History, Theory, and Design. I revamped this class at Georgia Tech this year through my excitement with the Museum of Papermaking. And I taught this class in order to work with the museum and design exhibits. So the class, as the title implies, is 3 words: history, theory, and design. Does exactly that. First, we survey the history of museums from their invention as a public institution in antiquity, their rebirth in the Renaissance, and then the reinvention of the museum in the modern times as a museum, as a space of a public institution where different public functions of lifelong learning are being offered. Then we talk about the theory of museums, so museum practices contemporary related to today's society. So we talk about how museums are tackling different societal issues, and they're not just observers in the social being right now, but they're actually participating with having an active stance in issues of social sustainability, but also environmental sustainability. The Museum of Papermaking is very pertaining to these issues because paper is a very sustainable material, first of all, but also the processes and the way it's made is through socially. So it is environmentally sustainable in its own, but also the processes through it's made historically are also fostering social sustainability. And then the third component is the design, so the research, design, and the curation of the exhibition. And this past semester, we worked with this upcoming exhibition on transformed environments. So the students worked primarily in the building of the content, but also in the design of preliminary boards and then prototyping of original artifacts, tactile objects that the public could engage in a more tactile and experiential way. So I mentioned the survey of museum as a public institution, the different types of museums we reviewed, and the students worked on an assignment. They visited a local museum and they produced a review of that museum about its design, different aspects. So students had to choose to visit a local museum from a variety of museums, science museums, children's museums, art museums here in Atlanta, and review issues of circulation, issues of the narrative construction, design components like the lighting, the sound, if there are any sensory devices or tactile components, pedagogical, accessibility strategies for people with low vision or deaf or mobility issues. So these are the things, the components of this assignment. So students acquired an experiential approach to museums, engaged with them, and presented them to their classmates. So the whole class collectively was able to review several museums here in Atlanta. Then the contemporary issues related to contemporary museums practices. We did bibliographical review and also discussed issues about repatriations, decolonization, indigenous perspectives in contemporary museums, issues of social accessibility, inclusion, people of different backgrounds, different genders, different disabilities, how they can relate to the museum itself. And finally, issues of sustainability and climate change and how the museum advocates for them and kind of gives hope to the public and helps them come up with their own action plan against it. So again, here the students not only had to do bibliographical review, but also they had to do research online, identify successful case studies of museums that have tackled these issues successfully. So again, as a class, we worked around different strategies that museums can have and develop in order to be vital institutions of our society addressing our own issues that concern the public. And finally, we reached the design component, which was probably the most fun component of the class, where students engaged with original artifacts. So first of all, we had to look at the permanent collection of the museum. And I personally looked closely at the historical collection, which I presented also at the paper at the Emory University at the conference. So overall, the museum has original artifacts from the Dart Cantor's collection, which include, first of all, the ethnographic objects that he has collected, then the books that he has written, printed, edited themselves. So the book itself is a product of hand labor, because across all stages of the production, Dart himself engaged into designing the book, designing the typeface, printing, casting it, then using it to manually print the books and manually bind them. But also the book itself, not only it's an original artifact itself, reflecting the whole design, the cover, reflecting the content, but it's also the content itself incorporates original specimens and from the cultures that the book talks about. So here you see, for example, the book about papermaking in India, and the second half of the book includes original samples that were included in this book, as well as pictures. This is from a book that was actually commercially printed in order to include photography. But the books that are handmade are original objects on their own. And then, so that is about the permanent collection. And then we looked at this collection to identify objects that related to architecture and design. So what are the original objects that we can identify in the museum that either refer to the design of the building, or they are objects in the interior of the building, in the design of the building, like finishes, or the paper itself is used as a construction material, or whether paper was used in the design pedagogy. So here you see some of the objects that we identified. First of all, a woodblock by William Morris Company and the wallpaper that was made out of that woodblock. The woodblock was carved in rosewood and included this inlaid brass, so that the edges and the outlines of the different floral motifs are very sharp. It's an exquisite object that whoever has the luck to visit the exhibition will be able to see it. Then tracing paper, Japanese tracing paper, which is used in architectural practice. Daruma doll, which is made out of papier-mâché. Papier-mâché is a very common material, as you will see in decorative panels within the architectural space. We don't have any samples of that, but we did have this sculptural piece, so we included it. A book of samples of wallpapers, screens, Soji screens from India, Korea, Japan, that were used in making large format paper to be used as an architectural material in construction, as room dividers instead of glass in window panels, sliding doors, room dividers, as I said. So from Asian architecture, this is one of the major lessons learned when Western scholars and architects were able to visit Japan. This is what they discovered, that paper was actually used as a building material. And then we, with the students, designed the different thematics of the exhibition. So first of all, paper in architectural representation, paper and interior design, including the wallpapers, the papier-mâché, and the solid screens as a construction material. Primarily, this also showcasing the research at Georgia Tech, and then paper in architectural pedagogy and practice. So first of all, in architectural representation, before the printing press, there were no drawings, not because people didn't know how to draw, but because there was no reliable way of reproducing these drawings and relying on the drawings in order to design and build the building. So as soon as the printing press was spread, then suddenly architectural books spread, and that's when we are able to have an architect advocating for his own work. And this is the first example with Andrea Palladio publishing a book with his own designs. And then we see how his design ideas spread from Italy to England and the United States. So you can trace them backwards. In the United States, primarily the book by James Gibbs, a book on architecture, became very popular. Also, another important figure was Thomas Jefferson, who was an amateur architect, and he advocated for architecture for the new nation. So one of the drawings in James Gibbs' book was this design, and then you see how Mount Erie very closely replicates this design. As you see here, the design of Mount Erie follows the drawing of James Gibbs, which was published in 1728, which also very much follows the design of Villa Pisani, built by Andrea Palladio 200 years earlier and published in his book Quattro Libri di Architettura. So, and then the front porch itself being very much inspired by Roman antiquities that Andrea Palladio surveyed in Rome and documented them in his books. So you see here the very clear lineage from ancient precedents, Renaissance designs, then 18th century designs here across the Atlantic Ocean. Here also books, important architectural books were also builders' manuals that builders were able to, that builders followed. Leila Ross Wilborn, another famous Georgian first female architect in Georgia who published Southern Homes and Bungalows, floor plans that the architects in rural areas could follow and yet produce good designs for their clients. Then the kit houses, which are the next level, where you don't just have the massive reproduction of design, but you have also the massive fabrication of buildings. So buildings that were prefabricated and shipped according to order based on these kits and kit orders. Then paper, very much influenced with the graph paper, the design, how it's made on the grid, but also in interior design, very impactful through different media. So soji screens that I mentioned earlier in Japanese architecture, papier-mâché making architectural design details started in Kashmir, where paper being a cheap and light material is very easy to be molded and creating sculptural motifs. But also it spread throughout the Western world, also in furniture. And yet today there is a commercial company producing architectural details in luxury for luxury houses here in Miami. Wallpaper, also here again you see the block of William Morris as well as Chinese wood blocks, and then the wallpapers that they produce. We produced replicas because obviously these have to be behind the glass. Tactile replicas that not only people with disabilities, low vision can actually feel, but everybody can touch. So here you see two different strategies that we followed. The one to the right is a replica made with laser cut wood in two layers to create this depth. And then the one to the left, the William Morris block, follows two methods. One is the CNC 3D sculpting into the wood, but also laser cut plexiglass, so that what is with metal in the original here becomes plexiglass, so it still simulates this hard edge and outline. And then paper as a construction material, this doesn't really have much tactile objects, it's primarily posters. And then finally, paper in architectural pedagogy, where we see how the Bauhaus came up with the paper as a medium to teach about design principles and architecture. And here we see a design review as well as a paper exercise that the Getty has actually published, and anybody can print in their house. So we printed this sheet of paper that guests can take with them, and they can cut it, score it, they can cut it with a knife, and then they can fold it and create this design that we also feature in the exhibition. And then finally, the paper. We have talked a lot about environmental sustainability and the different research that Georgia Tech develops in the Institute of Renewable and Biodegradable Products, so that the museum can advocate for climate change, and the museum can actually participate in this major issue that is also part of the strategic plan of Georgia Tech, but in general is a major problem that the whole society at large is tackling. So first of all, we have been looking at the museum, how it can become a model of sustainable building itself, but also how it can teach the science behind climate change, how it can advocate for action against it. So, and what are the kind of projects that are being developed at Georgia Tech that are towards this goal? So here you see 3 preliminary posters with 3 different projects. One is developing a hemp-based insulation instead of the fiberglass insulation that is commercially available today. The other is another project with based on the notion of origami and the notion of folding paper to build building blocks. And the other is, again, using the origami paradigm to develop pedagogical materials for electric circuits. So this is work in progress. We're still working. This whole semester we are spending to further develop this component, pretty much following the same methodology. And we are looking at other projects using creating a fiber-based concrete as well as other cellulose materials. So this is what I had to say. This is the work from my class. I hope I have been on time.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Phelps. I had the pleasure of working with the Museum of Papermaking in Myrsini in Jurisha last semester on this project. My class is a digital humanities course in design. All sorts of design is covered during the semester, but for this particular semester, working with the Museum of Papermaking, we tackled the design of installations, all types of installations, ranging from purely art focused installations to museum installations. And part of what this exercise was for the course was very similar to client and creator. So the first half of the semester, the course focused on a lot of the tools that are used in museum exhibition creation, specifically using digital media. So things like digital pedestals, projection, CNC machines, plotter machines were studied and used, and we created content on them throughout the semester in preparation for this project. And for the major conventions in this project that I kind of want to point out are key to this presentation is the collaboration, the connection, and the conversation, and the conversion. Now, this is from the context of each one of these courses, Myrsini's course, my course, and the Museum of Papermaking. This collaboration sought to create a digital identity or a digital version of some of the research that was happening in the School of Architecture. So part of what makes this work is the collaborative part. Not only the collaboration between schools and the museum, but really the collaboration between the students. Even though these students were in two different courses and course sections and schools, we were able to see the data and see the elements of these museum pieces being built through research. So we had dozens of students across two disciplines. They had a 10+ week schedule, right, during the course of the semester and more. And my class had a 5-week design schedule. Now, 5-week design schedule is very accelerated. But as the research was being done and these artifacts were being collected digitally, we were monitoring that progress throughout the semester, getting a lot more insight to what was being found, and more importantly, what was being accentuated as themes emerged. So the connection part of this project really is through the School of Architecture and Myrsini's hard work on the documenting of all of these amazing artifacts that are both hidden and revealed at the Museum of Papermaking. So this client creator relationship that I mentioned earlier really is a simulation for work for our students outside of the college as they graduate and they join the workforce. This type of design needs to be multimodal. It also needs to be more than just creative. It needs to be interpretive. And this type of connection, I believe, was a success in that respect. The component of conversation really does come from the boots on the ground understanding of what the message is, right? So with these hundreds of artifacts that were generated, it was really up to the LMC students to interpret that research into a multimodal kind of visual, audio, interactive perspective. Now, in the digital humanities, especially in literature, media, and communication, these students are not trained in design. That type of training happens in the School of Design. And this was something new to not only the students, but to a lot of the faculty that was consulted on the design of these projects. So, working within the museum space, taking in conversations with the Museum of Papermaking in understanding what considerations we had to interpret and work into these projects, things like location, time, and costs had to be cross-referenced with the audience and the methods in which these artifacts were created. So there was a lot of kind of self-discovery and understanding what was important, and more importantly, what was paramount to the narrative that we were trying to build. So we got feedback from architecture, from Myrsini herself over a 2-week period, and we had several design iterations through revisions. So I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit of that now. Now, the conversion of artifact to idea to interactive digital technology, it needs to go beyond novelty. These are some of the core tenets of this course. And what I mean by goes beyond novelty is, places like museums often show information, show artifacts, show history in a very specific way. And this way is tried and true across all different types of museum locations. And a lot of what seems to happen and what we tried to concentrate on is avoiding novelty for novelty's sake. That is, why would we create a medium like a pedestal, a projection, an interactive piece, if it did not add to the narrative, if it did not expose more information, if it did not create learning experiences for all the audience that is to visit the museum. So looking at these installations that were conceived as technological artifacts that enrich this museum experience, but also don't really look at one audience as part of what's being shared. So we have to kind of appeal to a broad audience. We have to dive deeper into the content so that folks from all ages, all backgrounds, can not only understand at a higher level what's trying to be communicated, but really have more of an understanding of how paper making fits into our society, right? And we do this by establishing pride in this work. We ask the right questions, we retain this information, and we look at this design process from the audience's perspective, and we let the narrative define the technology that's used and not the other way around. So going beyond novelty is really something that sets apart memorable installation experiences from simply novel ones. So we started with 8 concepts, 8 working groups. Like I said, we monitored the data that was being gathered, the presentations, the digital artifacts, the SVGs that were being generated from the lino cuts or from the wood carvings. Myself and Myrsini kept in conversation during this time, as truly, because we were compartmentalized, it really let the experts thrive, right? And if we bring in designers too early into this process, things tend to get muddled. And I do think that this silo separation really did help the concepts evolve. Eventually, those concepts evolved into 4 core concepts. These concepts utilized technology, they utilized physical media, they utilized interaction, and more importantly, they utilized the unique attributes of each artifact that was created by Myrsini's wonderful team. So 4 core projects that were selected might seem familiar from Myrsini's presentation. We have Soji Paper and Light. This has to do with light and screens and environments and context, and the building materials that provide this from a historical perspective, the Soji screen perspective. We also have the Paper Space, which is an interactive laboratory. It's an immersive environment that uses paper and digital architectural designs to help create interior experiences that use these paper products as building materials, not for buildings, but for elements inside of those buildings. We also have Build with Paper architecture. This is more of a scan, grab, and build. This is a treasure hunt across the Museum of Papermaking that is purely digital and has several take-home components for visitors. And then we also have the Bauhaus paper cutting. This really does lend itself more to understanding the form of paper and accentuating the lessons in the pedagogical perspective of the Bauhaus paper cutting kind of movement. So I'll start with kind of outlining some of these transformed environments into, we'll go straight into the Bauhaus paper cutting project. Now, this project has a core concept of the research that was done by Myrsini's team as Bauhaus using paper as design. And this project really did kind of jump out as well, for lack of a better term, a very obvious no-brainer when it comes to engaging the audience on a physical level. Whereas, much of the museum is purely observational. A lot of the data shows that when you engage visitors physically, they tend to retain information and retain that story and retain that narrative to a higher degree. So this project uses a plotter, and I'll get into the plotter in a little bit, but understanding that paper as a design pedagogy, and in that what you teach through the paper is the learning environment. So this, again, is bringing out some of the themes and some of the learning that was originally intended and originally designed into these artifacts, and bringing those artifacts to life. Artifacts that aren't behind a glass case, but artifacts that you can actually put your hands on, much like the Bauhaus designs that you can download, cut out, and create yourself. So this idea is using a plotter, and a plotter is traditionally it's used in architecture as a printer of sorts, a printer that uses all sorts of apparatus to do that printing, everything from pens, pencils, all sorts of substrates, different types of paper. It's really an historical artifact that has fallen out of kind of technology's zeitgeist. And this plotter is something that we used in the course extensively for about 6 weeks to not only explore how different writing utensils are affected by texture of paper, but we explored different types of paper and how that affects the interpretation of the narrative. So in this case, this team chose to use cutting tools and pens to implement, to create and build and print. Seemingly the aesthetic feels like it's by hand because it's done with pen and paper. And interactors could come and download these, not download these designs, but upload these designs to, a physical robotic medium, right? One that takes this digital creation that was intended to teach, and it puts it up on a wall to be printed, to be drawn, and to be cut. And this type of interaction goes beyond novelty, because now what we're seeing is we're seeing what usually is digital become physical and become an artifact that you now own. And that adds a lot of user agency to the visit. And it's really one of the core reasons why this project stood out among the 8. So, some of the themes in choosing the designs that go into the physical process were connecting past and present, kind of, showing that innovation and accessibility surpasses current kind of limits or current ideas of what this is. So going beyond just it being a physical medium of a digital artifact in the museum, it goes more into understanding that this physical medium is something that we see every day. And the tools that are contained in this type of installation are fairly straightforward, using a touchscreen kiosk station, paper, cardstock, pens and writing utensils, blade attachments, and a large format plotter. This flow was designed with the user as the kind of paramount driving force, in understanding that user-centered design is one of the key components into any good design. But curating this experience not only to engage the audience, but to also have them, give them time to contemplate and interact with these artifacts in several different forms. So the flow of this installation goes from the guest enters the exhibit room. They're attracted to the plotter on the wall as a novel kind of device that they may or may not have seen before. The kiosk provides templates to choose from. And during this provision, the templates are outlined as what they're meant to teach and what they're meant to look like and what they're meant to ultimately provide to those who print them out. The guests get to see past examples, artifacts that maybe reinforce some of the learning objectives, But really, they get to choose their design and send it to a physical device, unlike many have seen before. So as this paper is printed, it is also cut, and these cuts, they fall with gravity, and they fall with the weight of the paper. And then when the guests retrieve those, they go to a folding table, and they work their piece as they wish, giving them a takeaway, something to take home. The location that we choose was the very back wall. This is an AI-generated image, as the 5-week design turnaround is a very short amount of time. So we relied on some of these pre-visualizations based on graphic design work that we fed into a local AI system that we run. So providing this space for users not only to explore and learn more, but to also interact with this physical device creates a circle of engagement, and it makes this project truly unique, and also one that's fairly expensive. One of the limitations of all of these projects that you see is a limitation in budget. These are common constraints in any design project, and especially in museum design projects. So we supplied Myrsini's team and Myrsini with a budget-friendly option, one that could be used with an iPad and a commercially available plotter, and a more extensive version, one that was truly bespoke for the space. The second environment that I want to talk about is an immersive environment. If you've ever been to things like the Van Gogh experience, the Las Vegas Sphere, these immersive environments are becoming more popular and understood by the public as spaces where not only the content is curated, but the space is curated digitally, right? So the paper space, it is composed of 4 different pieces. The room itself is all projected kiosks that add an interactive layer in which the audience can engage. The process of building furniture using the different materials provided by Myrsini's team, and also understanding that these variables can be changed, the plasticity, the strength, the weight, all of these variables that are built into some of the research that is being done at Georgia Tech are now kind of up to the user to convey. And the takeaway really is the photograph, or the fake real photograph, the simulation that the user gets of this room that they designed using paper materials as building components. So we also do workflows. So we do, these are often called mind maps or flow charts. This is the experience charted from one piece to the other, making sure that each part of the experience adds to the learning objectives and the enforcement objectives, reinforcing things that may be on the wall that aren't read, or enforcing ideas that maybe are hard to describe unless they are materialized digitally. So the room plan for this was the larger, one of the larger rooms at the Museum of Papermaking, as we wanted this project to surround the visitors and also provide the visitors with more than just one area to interact. So by creating a scale that was more lifelike, we were able to move this creation and projection up to the walls so that it was as big as it would be if you were actually creating it. And these mechanics of the creation were outlined in the kiosk software itself. So the room not only contained projectors in which to modify your digital twin of the furniture that you were creating, but it also gave way to creating materials and being able to look and see and feel these materials as they would be if they were making it on their own. And one of there's a lot of small details in here that I may be skipping over, but one of the best details of this was that the kiosks are also made out of these paper building materials, which is pretty great. So this consists of both hardware and software creation. The hardware creation obviously has a budget associated with it, and the software creation obviously has a budget associated with it. As the budgetary constraint is only there to, I don't know, limit the creativity and the creative solutions that the students may have for not only engagement, but making sure that the narrative is covered with the least amount of monetary output. So physical takeaway being top cards and bottom cards. These are actually printed materials or photographic materials. We could use, it was suggested that we either use pre-formatted, pre-printed materials to show what each audience member built, or to do this digital simulation on chemical paper. So these are Polaroids, digital Polaroids, which I thought was pretty great. So there is a lot of inspiration here, drawing inspiration from other museum installations, but also drawing inspiration from the research from Myrsini's team, and combining the best way to convey these narratives physically allows us to kind of, when we do these surveys, it allows us to choose the right medium, choose the right perspective in which to tell this story, and enforce it in a way that, again, goes beyond just novel, beyond just interesting or cool. And it enforces the message in a way that that compounds it, right? Rather than just augments it. The third one is build it using paper architecture. This one is more of a, I don't know, it engages the entire space of the Museum of Papermaking. It encourages interactors and audience to explore the space once again, even though they may have passed through it already. And this motivation really comes off of this team's eagerness to use all of the artifacts and a lot of the research that was created by Myrsini's team, not settling on just Shoji screens or just building materials, but saying we want to engage in each and every one of these different pieces that make up the Museum of Papermaking and this research that was happening. So essentially, everybody gets when you enter the space, you get a material. You get to choose a material card. You get to explore the space, read the material card, and take it to a kiosk. When you scan this card in the kiosk, you're able to build a structure and interact with an app that launches the user experience and can send this to you digitally via email. But it also allows you to physically have in your hand the different pulps and the different materials that are being described in the digital experience. So each card would be made out of a different material and have a different material quality. These cards would be able to have some sort of collection component. These are stickers or symbols or stamps that get put on your cards as you visit each spot, and you find where the other cards are being housed. And really what this is meant is to really not only engage the exhibition space, but engage the museum as a whole. So, the scanning, the educating, and then the constructing really touches on all three tenets, which is the physical, the digital, and then the learning. And I quite liked this project. And this project was one of the better projects that integrated a lot of the core ideas as far as accessibility. Things like printing Braille into the cards, making sure that low vision or vision impaired guests could read it with high contrast. So this one was really detailed in its considerations. So we have the four different building materials were chosen because of their economy. We were able to source cardstock out of bamboo, out of wood, out of eucalyptus, things that would be economical not only for the exhibit, but for the museum itself, as these are consumables. Anytime you have a take home, it's something that needs to be refilled and thought about budgetarily. So we have straw, albaca, and introducing how accessibility would be automatically built into these pieces. So the kiosk materials, all off-the-shelf components, making sure that none of these components were actually components that were bespoke, right? They didn't come from a single company. They were open, accessible, replaceable if they break, and inexpensive if they break. And if you've ever been to a museum installation that's digital, you'll know that one of the biggest challenges with installations like these is uptime, making sure that these installations are running every day for the course of the work. So the placement of this is the placement of this specific installation is actually, it starts at the front desk, and as each visitor goes to the different exhibits from process to history, they're really taken through these places and exposed to some of the nuance that may be skipped or may be unseen in the museum.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you guys a couple of questions. The first is, how much did the students actually get? Did the students actually get to um, uh, present to one another? Like, how much did the students get to interact with one another in between your two classes?
Not at all. It's a part of the challenge with doing, with doing cross-listed courses or courses that aren't cross-listed but are teaming up on a large project anyway, is that I mentioned it earlier, these silos that we sit in, and we were observing from afar, right? And we were essentially watching a Dropbox or a drive fill up with this material in real time. And honestly, it was revelatory because as the different teams that Myrsini was commanding created these artifacts and put them in there digitally, we were able to kind of look at it from a different perspective, right? Not look at it from a research perspective, but really sit in our silo and think about design without having to kind of consider where these came from. And ultimately that put us in a perspective of visitors, right? That don't know anything about the content until they get to it.
And Myrsini, I'm curious. I assume you probably had this conversation early on with your students, but what was their relationship or understanding of museums at the beginning of the course? And was there anything that you witnessed to see their perspective or understanding bloom or change through the course of designing this exhibition?
So we started the class with a kind of a brief, what does a museum mean for you? And give us an example of a museum that spoke to you. And my class had a very small number of students last semester. So it was a very intimate class, and every single student came up with a whole different reason why a museum spoke to him or her. And it was either because of the space, either because the museum connected with the urban environment where it was located. It was either because it had a very nice atrium with plants. I remember now the Isabella Stewart Museum in Boston was one of the museums used. The other was a temporary exhibition at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., that you could see the exhibition and then through the window you could see the actual city behind. I think that the class, and I think that was also in the aftermath of my collaboration the semester before with Abigail Stanger's class, which was about accessible design. I think by the end of this class, everybody understood that whatever we are showing, we have to make a tactile replica or something that the visitors can engage. It doesn't need somebody to be blind in order to need it. Everybody needs it.
Mhm.
And our hope was to have digital applications as well. But soon enough, that became out of the question. So I was very happy and very lucky that Daniel was able to tackle that aspect with his own students. So ultimately, I think in both classes, students understand that it's not about what you show, but what the story you want to tell. And the more sensory this experiential this story becomes, the better. This extends the time a visitor stands in front of an artifact. It extends the time he's thinking about it even after he leaves the museum, and it extends the impact that that artifact has.
Gotcha. And did your students get to see the projects that Daniel's students proposed, even if they didn't get to interact directly with? Did they get to see?
We were so short on time. Nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
I only one student who was a computer scientist. She was kind of behind. She didn't do any prototyping. I asked her to perhaps facilitate and help Daniel students. So she showed up at a virtual meeting, but then everybody was so much into presenting their work. She wasn't engaged in any stage of the presentation. So then I said, never mind. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I told you to sit in
Yeah.
that meeting.
I mean, I have to say what we were trying to do was fairly ambitious. And in our first meeting over the summer, I believe, before we did this in the fall, it seemed completely accomplishable. And given the time frame, I think we accomplished a lot. Putting this presentation together really allowed me to reflect. I don't know if it's the same with you, Myrsini, on how much we actually got done and how much learning these students actually took away from it.
And the truth is, I was teaching that course for first time.
Yeah,
So
me
I
too.
had to put together the whole course from scratch.
Hmm.
And you were teaching a course that fulfilled requirements for like preliminary skill sets.
Hmm.
It was like a graphic design course. It wasn't anything close to a museum interactive applications course. It wasn't like an upper level grad course that students already had the skill set.
Hmm.
So I think that was a great accomplishment given the parameters.
Well, the museum has uh, been pleasantly pleased with all of the work that both of your classes have done. I hope that people will come out and see the exhibition in its physical state. And we do have plans to try and implement, not for this current show, but for a future show, the uh, the scanned uh, project that Daniel presented. Because of that kind of scavenger hunt quality about it, I think it applies very well uh, to getting people uh, to looking at some of the things that aren't as popular in this space, in our permanent exhibition space. So thank you all so much for the work you've done with your students, and I'd like to thank the students as well, and look forward to future collaborations. Um, I've got some housekeeping to do in terms of our exhibition. Um, just want to let people know that the reception for this show will be Thursday, April 23rd from 4 to 7. It's free and open to the public. So if you are in the Atlanta area, I hope that you'll come by and say hello and see the fruits of the students' labor in person. Um, also, if you want to kind of keep up with what's going on at the museum, you can find out information on our website, paper.gatech.edu, or you can join the newsletter. Send a email to our education curator, anna.doll.doll at rbi.gatech.edu. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter. And just thank you for attending the programming. This will be posted on our website and on our YouTube channel. So please give us about a week to just edit and clean up things, and encourage students, friends, family to take a look. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.